Here are 8 tips to improve contrast of your images using nothing more than Lightroom. Let's go! While the contrast slider quickly adds punch to your images, it doesn't give you much control. Instead, use the tone sliders like highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, and even exposure to more precisely target the tonal ranges you want to change. For this image, we can make the whole scene a lot more impactful by bringing down the exposure, making everything darker first. As I drop the exposure, I'm always paying close attention to the histogram because we don't want to introduce clipping in the darkest or brightest areas. But taking a look at it, you can see we still have room to push the darkest areas a little further. That means I can bring down the shadows, and as I bring down the shadows, we are going to increase the contrast of the scene. Of course, I can not only make the dark areas darker, but also the bright areas brighter. So therefore we have the highlights and the whites sliders. I would say let's bring up the highlights. This will further separate the brighter tones from the darker tones, and thus we're creating contrast. Let's also push the whites. Keep in mind, as we push these sliders, we don't want to introduce any clipping in the darkest or brightest parts. To make sure this won't happen, we can hold down the Alt key while adjusting these sliders. And if we push it too far, Lightroom will give us a visible indication where the clipping is happening. Right now you can see as I bring down the blacks, there is some quite heavy underexposure right here in the foreground. Holding down the Alt key just makes it a lot more easier to see this kick in. This also works for the brighter tones, so if I hold down the Alt key and push the whites, you can see where clipping in the brighter parts will be introduced. We can also see this through the histogram. As we push these sliders, it will spread. Clipping is indicated by these little icons in the upper corners of the histogram. Talking about the histogram, another way with which we can control contrast is directly through it. Did you know you can actually drag the histogram? For that, hover over the area you want to change. Let's say we want to make the midtones a little brighter. Simply drag the histogram to the right side. And thus we can brighten up the midtones. Lightroom will then change the tonal sliders automatically depending on which area you were adjusting. This can be useful because contrast is nothing more than spreading the histogram. So with this technique, we can easily target specific parts of an image and push it around for better contrast. Next up, clarity and dehaze. These two are perfect for fine-tuning contrast. Dehaze is supposed to clear up your images from haze. It is doing that by altering the contrast. It will also make the whole shot look darker and slightly change colors. The clarity slider, on the other hand, specifically targets the midtones contrast. We can see that when pushing the slider and taking a look at the histogram. You can see the midtones shifting a little bit further to the left side. The trick is to only use tiny amounts globally, because otherwise if you go too crazy, clarity and dehaze will destroy our shots by making it look awful. On the other hand, you can use negative clarity and negative dehaze to add a very dreamy glow effect on your images. Applying contrast globally is always a good starting point for the editing. But to really make footage pop, we need to treat different areas of the image with different adjustments, with less or more contrast introduced. One thing I love doing for my shots is to add a lot more punch to the sky. Take a look at this one. It's looking pretty good, but I want to make the clouds pop a little more without affecting the rest of the image. For that, I can simply use a linear gradient mask. So let's head into the masking menu. Let's create a new mask, and I'm choosing a linear gradient, with which I'm going to target most of the sky. Of course, this linear gradient is now overlapping the church in the foreground, but I only want to target the sky, so we do have a problem here. We need to modify this mask. So let's click on it, go to Subtract and choose Select Subject, which will subtract the subject from this linear gradient, leaving us with a mask only for the top part of the sky. And at this point we can work on introducing contrast specifically for that area. Since these clouds consist of brighter tones, I can make use of the blacks and the shadow slider, bring them down and simply add contrast this way. I can also use some clarity to further boost this effect. This way, we made the sky look much more interesting without altering the rest of the image, which at this point really doesn't need more contrast. If you're not sure which areas to target in your images, try to go for the 3 most important ones: subject, sky, and foreground, and play around with the contrast for these areas individually. For a more advanced masking technique, we can use a Luminance range mask. So in the masking panel, click on Range and choose Luminance Range. With this mask, we can target specific tonal ranges of the image, so shadows, midtones or highlights. That is totally up to us. We can use the Luminance range slider to set up the tonal range we are targeting. A great way to introduce beautiful contrast using this mask is to target the midtones of an image. Think of it as a way more advanced clarity slider if you want. Right now, the Luminance range is set to cover everything from the darkest blacks to the brightest highlights. But we only want to target the midtones. So we need to filter out the blacks. I'm clicking on this little icon right here and I'm going to drag it further to the right side, filtering out the darkest areas of the image this way. Let's go with something like this. Alright, then we also need to filter out the highlights. I'm going to click on this little icon right here and drag it further to the left. Alright, now we have taken out the blacks and we have taken out the whites. You can see this thanks to the overlay. But you can also see the edge is super harsh. So we need to find a way to make the transition from bright to midtones softer. We can click on this little handle right here and bring it down as well, softening the transition area. Let's bring it down quite a bit because we only want to target the midtones. The transition area for the highlights looks good now, but we also, of course, need to do that for the blacks. Again, I'm going to click on this handle for the darker areas and I'm going to drag it to the right. Okay, that's looking much better. Now we have a smooth gradient for both the darker and brighter areas of the image. Once the mask is set up, I like to start by bringing up the highlights. And I'm also going to reduce the shadows. This is highly dependent on the image, so there is no one solution fits all. You need to play around with these things until you get something that looks good. For this particular scene, I had to push the brighter areas, so that means I'm also going to push the whites a little further, but I'm not going to touch the blacks, because if I bring down the blacks, you can see the darker areas are getting a little bit muddy. So no reduced blacks for this midtones range mask for this image. So let me turn off this Luminance range mask to give you a better idea of what this does. This was before and that's after. It's a very tiny change, but it's things like these that really separates average edits from a really good edit. The color range mask is another great way to precisely add contrast. Let me give you another sky example, because with the color range mask we can easily target the blues of the sky. So let's go into the masking panel, create a new mask, and here we are going to choose a color range mask. Since I want to target the blues of the sky, I'm going to click somewhere in the blue part of the sky right here. We can use the refine slider to further modify the color range, so we can reduce the color range by bringing the refine slider down, or we could bring it up and increase the color range. It's always a good idea to further modify a color range mask like this, since the sky should be darker at the top than in the lower area. So what I usually do is to simply subtract a linear gradient, getting rid of this area. So let's click on this mask, click on subtract, choose a linear gradient, and then I'm going to subtract the lower area of the sky. This leaves us with the top part as a mask, and what I'm going to do next to add contrast is to simply make it darker by bringing down the exposure. And instantly you can see how this cloud covering the mountain peak is now way more visible thanks to this color range mask, as we have introduced more contrast this way. With the color range mask we can also target the mountains without including the glowing red part of the mountain peak. So let's use another color range mask, and I'm clicking somewhere right in here. This gives us a really nice selection. We can further modify it by subtracting. I will choose a brush now. And I'm going to get rid of these things at the top. Then as I add more contrast to this area, we can guide the viewer's focus more on the glowing peak itself making it a better image this way. For tip number 7, we want to head into the color mixer. Here we can not only change the hue and the saturation, but also the luminance of specific color tones. That means we can make specific colors brighter or darker. For this shot there are 3 main colors: blue, yellow and green. We can introduce fine contrast by targeting each of these through the luminance settings. Let's make the foreground brighter first. Since this area consists mostly of yellow tones, all we need to do is to bring up the yellow luminance. Just be careful, as always I recommend checking the histogram to not make things too bright. Then we can target the blues of the sky, make them darker by bringing down the blue luminance. This really helps to make this shot pop, since we now have a brighter foreground and a darker sky. We can also target the trees in the distance by raising the green luminance, making them pop in front of that dark sky. Just be careful with these sliders, since you can already spot a little bit of a halo around the trees in the distance. Since those blue tones of the sky and the green tones of the trees are rather close to each other, you can quickly run into issues like these. Nonetheless, a great way to add contrast. If you have seen a few of my videos, you know I love split toning for the color grading aspect. But you can also use split toning to fine-tune the overall contrast of an image. Because just like in the color mixer panel, besides hue and saturation, we also have a luminance slider for the highlights, the midtones, the shadows, and even the global color wheel. So to improve the contrast of the scene, I want to carefully bring up the luminance for the highlights, making the brighter tones a little brighter this way. Again, pay close attention to the histogram, but that's looking great. Then I'm using the midtones to introduce contrast as I bring down the midtones luminance. And we can even go into the shadows and do the same thing, bringing down the luminance for the shadows, further improving the contrast. If the image gets too dark, I can head into the global settings and slightly bump up the luminance there. Wonderful. And that's it for the 8 tips and tricks on how to improve contrast using nothing more than Lightroom. If you have any tips or tricks yourself, feel free to share them in the comments. And if you want to support my work, I would be very happy if you would subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much for watching this video, and see you all next time.